Hello, happy Monday. It's April 5th, 2021, and this is in lieu of being in school this morning for Ed Psych at 9 o'clock because so many of you told me that you weren't going to be able to make it. I thought I'd just throw a video up here instead. You have from now until Wednesday to watch it. It's only going to be 15 minutes, so you can hopefully spend some time doing that. I want to thank you all for showing up on Wednesday of last week. That was amazing. I truly, truly appreciate it. Nothing is worse than if you have a guest speaker and then nobody shows up. It's like crickets. So I appreciate you showing up. Even if it wasn't for you or if it was something that you weren't interested in, I appreciate you doing it anyway because this may help transfer to whatever school you're going to. So some of that information that we talked about would be helpful to another school. So today, it says we're supposed to be doing Carol Dweck's article of praise, but we've already done it, so we're going to skip ahead and do something different. We are going to work out of the book Make It Stick today on page 102, and this is in your Canvas shell. So what I'm going to talk to you today is a quick video, and this is only going to be less than 15 minutes, so please stick with me. It's all about how your brain tricks you into knowing different facts. What do I mean by that? So Brene Brown has this fantastic book out. It's called Daring Greatly. If you've read it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. If you haven't, it might be something that you're interested in doing. So Brene Brown says, your mind is very good at telling you what you think you want to hear, what you think you thought you heard, and maybe what you want to hear in different situations, meaning that your brain will finish a story for you. So if you don't know what's happening, if you're on a phone call and you only hear one side of the story, what your brain will automatically do is will fill in the other side of the story so that whole conversation makes sense. There are different things in your brain that it has to finish. So if I say, bump, ba-da-dum, bump, in your head, I bet you went bump, bump, because your brain will finish the story. Once upon a time went into every one of our heads, right? Once upon a time. Those things are what your brain is automatically going to finish, regardless if that is what's happening in the real world or if it's being perceived. Your brain finishes stories for us. That's just the way it works. And the more you understand how your brain finishes stories like that, it makes more sense of how you learn how to study. So Brene Brown will say, if something happens with her husband or a boyfriend that they're not texting you back or calling right away, all of a sudden the story that's going on in your head could be, well, are they hurt? Are they sick? Are they dissing me? Are they ghosting me? Is there something else going on? Or is it just happened that maybe their phone battery was dead? So the story that you're telling yourself in your head isn't always what's happening. It's what you're perceiving to happen. And so we have this illusion of knowing what's going on. Our brains are so good at finishing stories. Oftentimes the stories are things that never happen in real life. Okay, so the more you know about your brain and the more you know how you think, the easier it is to learn. So obviously, monitoring our own thinking is called metacognition, right? So learning about our learning, thinking about our thinking is called metacognition. Meta is actually Greek for the word about. So cognition is your thinking. So thinking about thinking. So on page 102 in our book, it starts talking about different illusions your mind will go through to trick yourself into knowing something. And then I'm going to scroll, so maybe you want to close your eyes here in a second so you don't get all car sick. I'm going to scroll to 109 and start in on some of these illusions. Right here. So the very first illusion we're going to talk about is the hunger for narrative. And that's the kind of the story I was telling you before, like your brain will finish the story. So our understanding of the world is shaped by a hunger for narrative that arises out of our discomfort and ambiguity of our arbitrary events. Meaning that when something like plain old plain happens, nothing exciting happens, there's no like excitement, it just is the day to day, we kind of forget it. It's that when those surprising things happen, like something shows up, our head all of a sudden is going about what happened, how this happened, we have to have an explanation for that event. And so that's a lot of times when you talk about jurors in different cases, like, not jurors, eyewitnesses, that's what I'm trying to talk about. When you have eyewitnesses in a case, so if they're just watching something and then all of a sudden something like surprising happens, like a shootout or a robbery or something like that, your brain will automatically piece together who the bad guy is, who the good guy is, what's going on, before you really know the perception of what's happening in real life. That's why eyewitness accounts are really not foolproof, because your brain is automatically telling you the rest of that story. So if you are learning about memory, making sure we have the facts is the best way to know exactly what's going on. The second one that I want to share with you, that your memory can be distorted, because I'm on page 112 and it's right in the middle here. So our distortion of memories happens when we perceive what is going on from our past experiences. Do you remember the time we talked about how you feel when you're walking into a group of 7th grade girls? How you feel is going to be reacted onto what happened in your past that's going to bring up those memories. So your memory can be distorted. And sometimes when you remember something and then a family member also remembers something and it's completely different, your memory is reconstructed every single time in your head to make it more logical. Now, I've shared stories with you about what I remember my 1st grade teacher doing, my things that happened to me in kindergarten. And then to be clear, those are what my perceptions of those things were. I can't truly say if that's exactly what happened, but that's what my perceptions were, and that's what my memory is. So memories are tied to emotions, remember. So, and every memory has some kind of a logarithm to get coded into your head. And once we have this kind of code into your head, that visual or that place or that story can trigger that memory right away. But it's not triggering exactly what happened, it's triggering what you perceived to have happened at that time. So even though we have the illusion of knowing something because our mind has finished the story for us, and now it has maybe been the perception of that story that I remember, can we truly say it's a clear memory? No, we really can't. So people remember things that were implied but not specifically stated. So this is a huge sentence down at the bottom of page 112 here. So people remember things that were implied but not specifically stated, because that's when your brain is finishing that story for you. So if I, said something in class and some of you heard it one way and some of you heard it another way, what is the truth? It's both, right? They're both correct because both perceptions are what was remembered. What was actually said, we don't know unless it was videoed or recorded, and we can go back and prove that. But people remember things that were implied and not specifically stated. That's why girls, especially junior high girls and early high school girls, have a feeling and not to diss you guys out there, I'm not saying that, but more often than girls have these situations than boys do, where you're in a situation where there's tension. Well, she's looking at me funny. She doesn't like me, or there is some kind of rift in between the two of you. But that was all possibly implied. What actually happened between these two girls very rarely comes out as I don't like you because. If that was the fact, it would be an easy thing to okay, either we change what we're doing or we just blow the other girl off. But that's perception. So that glance across the room, or those stinky eyes that you may think you're getting from the person across the hall, or whatever it is, those are implied gestures. They're not specifically stated. So that's what we remember. So people take those implied gestures and turn them into memories. So all of a sudden it's oh yeah, I remember she doesn't like me because I had this feeling. She doesn't like me because she was looking at me funny. Whatever it was a perceived thing. It wasn't stated. So if we remember specifically stated things, that's one way, but most people remember most of their memories are what's implied and not what's happening. You can kind of think about this as boyfriend-girlfriend type situations. So if you are, liking someone more than maybe they like you, you are getting that implication. They probably didn't say that they didn't like you, but you're getting that implied because you can feel maybe that they didn't return your text. They're not looking at you. They're talking to somebody else. Whatever the case may be, is that implied is what people are going to remember and not the specifically stated. Interesting, I think. Okay, and the next one is on the top of page 113. It's your imagination inflation. So when we think of the stories in our life and in our head, how often do we get what we think should have happened as to what really happened? And little kids are the best at this, because they will tell you a story, and in their head they already have this imagination reel running, like something else is happening. And so because they imagined it, it's often become real to them and it's perceived to them, but it may not have actually happened. So imagination inflation refers to the tendency of people who, when asked to imagine an event vividly, will sometimes begin to believe, when asked about it later, that the event actually occurred. So adults who were asked, did you ever break a window with your hand, were more than likely on a later life inventory to report that they believe this event occurred during their lifetime. It seems that asking questions led them to imagine the event, and the act of having imagined it had later affected is more likely to think that it actually happened. Okay, so knowing all this stuff now, how can you rely on your memory for anything, right? It's so hard. And so I'm supposed to have this great memory to remember stuff for the test, or what I'm supposed to be doing in my classroom 3 or 4 years from now, and I can't even remember anything because my perception is different, my outlook is different, my imagination is different. It's very, very difficult. Memory is such a tricky thing. And one more thing before I go to share with you about memory and your distortion is the inferencing. So inferencing from other events can distort memory. Suppose that a police interview a witness shortly after a crime, showing pictures of possible suspects. Time passes, but eventually the police nab a suspect, one whose picture had been viewed by the witness. If the witness is now asked to view a lineup, he may mistakenly remember one of the suspects whose photo he saw as having been present at the crime. Particularly vivid example of a related process happened to Australian psychologist Donald M. Townsend. And if you have a chance, finish the rest of the story. It's very interesting. I see my time is ticking already. I only have 15 minutes on this recording, this video. So what happens is that we think we know something, and actually we really don't. It's actually called the curse of knowledge. So the things that we think we know and what we have perceived as to be true, our mind can trick us into finishing that story, into the illusion of perception, into the imagination that we may have, and then believing the implicated, indirect kind of conversations versus the stated out right. It's called the curse of knowledge. Now that I got you all kind of tangled up here, what do you know for true? Like, how do you can think back all these memories that you've had, and then all the things that you've learned in a book, and then books and teaching and classes and notes and videos and everything? How do you know what you actually remember is true? Well, that's when metacognition kind of comes into play. If you can clearly think of a memory and think back and say, okay, this is what I perceived, this is what I remember, and this is how I saw it, that would be my memory. But whether I can say my memory is fact or my memory is true, that's a whole different story. Because your brain, like I said before, will finish that story for you, regardless if it's true or not. So the curse of knowledge is close effect to the hindsight bias, or often what we call the knew it all along effect, which we view events after the fact has been more predictable than if they were before they occurred. So those kind of things happen like, oh, like hindsight's 20/20. I would have known that had I been in these situations before. And if you think about the whole pandemic, that's kind of where our world is right now. Like, had we known this was going on, we would have been better at this. But would we have been? That's the question. Okay, so if you have a chance, please read over this chapter on Make It Stick. It's very interesting. It will talk about the social influence of your memory, the illusion, the fluency illusion effect, the feeling of knowing it all or mistakenly true. Those things are real feelings that we have a false conscious of effect, meaning that we think something is happening when in fact it actually isn't happening, or it's happening in a different way than we perceive it. So, can you actually ever rely on your memory? Confidence in a memory is not a reliable indication of its accuracy. Period. It is tied to emotion. It is tied to the feelings that we perceive, but there it is. It's just like a flash in the past. And we think we remember it, but we may not remember everything accurately. So when you are studying, give yourself some grace, because what you remember while you're studying may not always be what you're supposed to be remembering, and when it comes back out again during a test or something else, you'll see that it may have been a little bit different than what you think. All right, my time is up. I hope you enjoyed that, but if you did, please go back and read that chapter. It's on Make It Stick, page 102, and it really makes you think twice about your own memory. See ya.